for being there
Thank you.
to tell us more about your book, Everything Sad is Untrue, a true story. What an interesting title.
Thank you. Oh, you can't see it because of my special background. Oh, there it is.
Yes, it's beautiful. By the way, the cover is just amazing.
Thank you. Isn't that beautiful? I didn't
It
have
is.
anything to do with it, but it's but yeah, it's called Everything Sad is Untrue, and it is a true story in the sense it's my autobiographical novel. It's about my family. I was born in Iran, and my mother converted to Christianity when I was a young one and ran afoul of the secret police, which is called the Comité. The Comité there is a terrifying group of people. And so she was, we had to escape the country with my mother, my sister, and I. My father chose to stay, and so we became refugees. For a short time, we went to the UAE and then Italy, and finally landed in Oklahoma, which is sort of where the story starts. It begins with this child standing in front of his classroom of fellow students who do not believe his stories at all, and but he wants to explain himself. He wants to tell the stories of his family and going back generations into the land of storytelling and legend and mythology in Persia. And so he's telling all these stories. It's going back generations until finally we find out that his father is going to come visit in Oklahoma, and all of a sudden this person, this giant from the land of stories, is now going to come to the real world. And how will that work? Will he sort of live up to the stories, or won't he? That's the sort of question near the end of the book. But it's a long it's an epic in some ways. Without trying to compliment myself, I just mean it spans over 4 generations in my family. So that is what the story is about.
And I've read that your book took quite a long time in the making. So
it was epic in the making, for sure. I've been wanting to tell this story since I was a little child, of course, but the crafting of it took about 13 years. Because it initially began as sort of an adult literary novel with, a memoir in the traditional sense, where I was, an adult writing, looking back. And when you look at a lot of the chaos of that trip, the scenario and the experience, an adult looking back to it was almost sort of deprived of the emotional core. So I actually tried to write it as an essay collection. And then finally, when I realized, no, it needs to come from the voice of that particular child, then it sort of struck, and I finally found my way to completion.
the structure of the book is quite unusual. No chapters. How did you decide to work that way?
Well, so when you get this young narrator, I don't think he structures his mind the way an adult writer would. And so really it's supposed to be a little bit of the experience. If you've ever sat with a child who's very excited to give you all the things right now, they've got a hold of you, they've got a hold of your hand, and they're not going to stop speaking until the whole thing is complete. So I wanted him to continue and not give you a single moment to put the book down, not give you a single moment to close the book. He's just going to, the feeling should be that even if you have to go to sleep and close this book, he'll keep talking. So that's what I wanted him to do. And in some ways you hear that in his voice, because he's often checking in with the reader. He says, "Are you still there? Like, are you still interested?" Because he knows that has not allowed a moment of silence.
Yes, that allows a real close relationship with the reader, I guess.
Yes, a close one, but also in the very childlike one, because he very rarely stops to ask about the reader. He's very specific about what he wants to offer, but he says several times that here we are in the parlor of your mind. Like, he's sitting with you. He sees himself as your guest, and he would very much like to give you something valuable, which to him is a story. So yes, he's very breathless throughout the book.
There's a very touching dedication to your mother. Has she read your book?
She has, yeah. She's read it several times. She likes it, which after 13 years of working on it, you'd want her to. She happens to be the hero of the story, of course. And at the same time, she experienced all of this as an adult. She's in some ways, I mean, she's the focus of the story. If she doesn't behave as she behaves, nothing happens. And so, I think she had to sort of forgive the fact that I had a very particular impression of people that she simply sees as differently. So, for example, I think her father, she perceives him as a very three-dimensional individual, and I sort of perceive him as a little bit of a distant villain in a lot of ways because, well, as a child, that's how I perceived him. He was a very scowling, difficult man. He was not particularly interested in children. Um, but I think everyone. So in a lot of ways, she of course would have her own interpretations, but was not sort of upset by mine. That's maybe the best way to put it.
And what about the rest of your family? How did they perceive this book?
Yeah, I told my father about it. He's in Iran, and I described it to him. He doesn't it hasn't a copy hasn't made it over to him yet, but more or less he was pleased. I mean, he is, I think, he's one of those figures who can and should be interpreted in many ways. And I think in the book he at least gets multiple interpretations. And yeah, and my aunt has read it, which I'm most close to her. She really she was very kind about it as well. Some of the stuff was very new to them. Both my mother and my aunt surprised me by telling me how much of the story they didn't know. So all the school experiences. I was particularly, I guess I was a very private child, so they read it with a lot of new information as well. That was pleasing to see.
Well, Daniel, it's been most interesting, and we're looking forward to reading more of you, to reading that book, very special one, and all the stories you love to tell people and that you share with us in that book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.